She laughed at me in front of her boss at her own birthday party. I smiled, raised my glass, said absolutely nothing, and drove home in silence. 8 weeks later, I walked into her boardroom as the man who held the deed to everything she had spent her entire life building her worth around. She never saw it coming. Not one single person in that room did. Please like this video and listen to my story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me which city you're listening from. I genuinely want to know how far this story travels, because what I'm about to share has been sitting in my chest for a long time, and it deserves to reach people who will truly understand it. My name is Marcus Halford. I'm 46 years old, and for the last 19 years, I was married to a woman I once believed was the most extraordinary human being I had ever encountered in my life. Her name is Diane Halford, Senior Vice President of Global Product Development at Voss Butte Group. If you have ever picked up a luxury moisturizer at a department store counter and wondered who was behind the formula, the packaging, the campaign, there's a good chance Diane's fingerprints were on it somewhere deep in the corporate credits. I am, and have always been, a tech person, a builder. 7 years ago, I started my company, Bridge Flow, out of a converted garage in Nashville, Tennessee. We develop supply chain management software for mid-sized manufacturers. I know, it does not make people lean forward at dinner parties. It is not glamorous. It does not photograph well for Instagram. But it works. It scales. And for the last 2 years, the numbers have been doing things that made me stop predicting them out loud, because saying them felt like tempting something fragile. Diane never quite saw it that way. She was supportive. In that particular way some spouses are supportive, the kind where the smile is always there, but the subtext underneath it hums at a frequency only you can hear after enough years of listening. She had her world, and it was a genuinely beautiful world from the outside. 5-star restaurant openings, product launches in European capitals, business-class lounges, and a LinkedIn profile that read like an ongoing award ceremony. My world was quarterly pipeline reviews, late nights debugging integrations, and coffee that had gone cold 3 hours before I remembered to drink it. She had grown comfortable over the years, treating the distance between our worlds as evidence that she was the engine of everything we had built together. The house, the lifestyle, the social standing. She believed she carried it. And honestly, I let her believe that. For a long time, I let her believe it because I had a longer plan, and plans like the one I was building require a certain kind of silence to grow. The night everything changed was a Saturday in early September. Diane had organized her own birthday party because she always organized everything herself. A private dining room at a beautiful restaurant in downtown Nashville, 40 guests, floral arrangements shipped in from a florist in Atlanta, and a photographer moving through the room like a quiet satellite, capturing every moment for purposes I had long stopped trying to understand. I wore a suit that evening that cost considerably more than Diane knew. I shook hands, made conversation, and sipped sparkling water all night because I had a 6:30 a.m. call the following morning with our Singapore distribution partner, and I needed my mind clean. Her boss, a man named Gerald Whitmore, was there. So was Patricia Chun, the VP Diane had been carefully cultivating for a joint venture proposal for months. So were a dozen others whose professional opinions Diane collected the way certain people collect rare things, carefully, obsessively, always with one eye on what they reflected back about her. It happened just after 9 o'clock. Diane was holding a champagne flute, laughing at something Gerald had said, when she turned slightly and gestured in my direction with a brightness in her eyes that I had learned, over many years, was not entirely genuine. "Marcus is just the sweetest thing," she said, her voice carrying easily across the table. "He runs his adorable little startup. It certainly won't be paying our mortgage anytime soon, but you know what? We let him have his dream." She winked at Gerald and turned that smile on me, the one that looked like warmth from a distance and felt like something entirely different up close. Gerald chuckled politely. Patricia gave me a small, careful nod. A few others smiled with just their mouths, the way people smile when they have witnessed something mildly uncomfortable and are choosing to let it pass. I raised my sparkling water. I said nothing. I simply nodded once, slowly, The way a man nods when he has heard something that is not worth the breath it would take to answer. But inside, in a place I had not visited in a long time, something shifted. Not anger, not humiliation, though a lesser version of me might have felt both of those things. Something quieter and considerably more purposeful than either. Something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment to wake up. Oh, that moment. That one small, casual, champagne-soaked moment. She had no idea what she had just started. On the drive home, Diane talked about the party with the particular energy she always had after a successful evening. Who had looked wonderful, who had clearly had some work done since last spring, how Patricia had complimented her earrings. She did not ask me a single question the entire drive. Not one. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the Nashville city lights slide past the window, and I thought about a folder in the bottom drawer of my home office desk. A folder with one name written on the tab in pencil, the handwriting slightly faded now from time. Franklin Reeves. I had not opened that folder in nearly 3 years. By the time we pulled into the driveway, something inside me had settled into place the way a key settles into a lock. I told Diane I had early calls and needed the guest room to focus. She nodded without really looking up from her phone. I did not sleep. I sat at my desk in the quiet darkness, opened my laptop, and pulled up Bridge Flow's financials. Month-over-month client retention was up 14%. 3 major enterprise contracts had cleared legal review that week. The company's cash position was the strongest it had ever been in 7 years. I sat there and I looked at those numbers, and something swelled up in my chest that was not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it, something solid and real and entirely my own. Then I opened the folder and found Franklin Reeves's number. I typed 3 words in a text message and hit send. Need to talk. His reply came at 11:47 p.m. Name a place. If you have ever been dismissed by someone who was supposed to believe in you, someone who stood beside you, and still somehow could not see you, stay with me. Because what happens next is for every single one of you. Franklin Reeves lived in a farmhouse outside a small town in central Vermont and had not formally practiced law in 4 years. But when I called him at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, the man who picked up sounded like someone whose mind had never once stopped running like a courtroom. His voice was calm, precise, unhurried, the voice of someone who understood that the most powerful things in life are built in silence. You sound like a man who has not slept, he said. Close enough, I told him. Then let's not waste what's left of the morning. When can you come? I booked a flight to Burlington for Thursday. I told Diane I had a partner summit in Boston. She looked up briefly from behind her coffee mug, nodded, and asked me to bring back a specific French roast she liked from a market near Faneuil Hall. That was the full extent of her curiosity about where I was going or why. The drive from the airport to Franklin's property took 40 minutes through countryside that looked like it had been painted by someone who wanted to remind you that beauty still existed outside of boardrooms and LinkedIn feeds. I found him on the front porch with a thermos and a legal pad, already writing, as if the conversation had begun before I had even arrived. He was 67 years old, lean, wire-rimmed glasses, with the particular stillness of a man who had spent decades in rooms where silence was the most expensive currency available. We shook hands. He poured me coffee. We sat. The October air moved through the trees. Walk me through what you're looking at, he said. I handed him a small drive. On it, 18 months of research I had been building quietly, methodically, the way I build everything without announcing what I was doing or for what purpose. The corporate structure of Voss Buick Group, its parent holding entity, the investment layers above that, the venture debt woven through the entire stack like old wiring. Franklin plugged the drive into a laptop, scrolled in silence for several long minutes, and then leaned back in his chair. The majority stakeholder is overextended, he said. They took a serious hit on a clean energy investment in South America about 18 months ago, I said. Floating rate exposure. They've been quietly looking at offloading assets. And Voss is on that list. Not yet publicly, but yes. Franklin looked at me over the rim of his glasses. The question is whether someone gets there first with a clean offer. A pause. Someone like you. Nothing with my name visible anywhere, I said. He set down his coffee and folded his hands in his lap. He was quiet in that specific way of his that meant he had already made the decision and was now simply building the architecture around it. "You need a layered acquisition structure," he said. "A limited partnership, offshore holding, clean buyer identity, and a legal team with absolutely no public profile." "I know what I need," I said. "I need you to help me build it." He smiled. Small, controlled, like a man who had been waiting for a question this interesting for a long time. "Are you certain about this?" I thought about the birthday party, the champagne glass, the wink, Gerald Whitmore's polite, comfortable laugh echoing across that dining room. "She stood up at her own birthday party," I said quietly, "and told her boss that my company was a cute little hobby that would never pay our bills. In front of 40 people. I'll let that sit for a moment. So yes, Franklin, I am certain." He picked up his legal pad and began to write. And that, right there, was the moment the clock started. What I built over the months that followed, with the people I am about to introduce you to, changed everything. Not just for me, for everyone in that story. Stay with me, because part 2 is where the real architecture begins, and you're going to want to see exactly how it was built, one invisible brick at a time. Welcome back. And if you were just joining this story, please go back and start from part 1, because what you are about to hear only lands properly when you understand where it began. We left off with me sitting on a farmhouse porch in Vermont, watching a 67-year-old retired lawyer pick up a legal pad and begin writing what would become the blueprint for one of the quietest, most precise things I have ever built in my life. The cold air was still around us. The coffee was getting cold in our cups. And somewhere back in Nashville, Diane was probably already composing her next LinkedIn post. On the flight home, I sat in the very last row of the aircraft and thought about a man named Daniel Voss. Daniel and I had started Bridge Flow together 8 years ago. 2 people, 1 idea, a shared desk in a co-working space in Midtown Nashville, surviving on terrible coffee and the kind of stubbornness that only makes sense when you genuinely believe in something. Diane had never liked Daniel. He was too unpolished for her tastes, she always said. Too raw, not the kind of professional presence that reflects well at the sorts of events she cared about. She had made her feelings known in that particular quiet way she had, the way you push water in a direction without ever appearing to push at all. By our 3rd year, Daniel had taken a buyout and walked away. I had let it happen. That was something I had carried ever since, heavier than I ever admitted to anyone, including myself. Because Daniel had not simply survived that departure. He had thrived. He had taken his buyout, invested it with the precision of someone who had learned patience the hard way, and was now running a boutique venture fund out of Atlanta with a reputation built on finding undervalued mid-market technology companies that everyone else had overlooked. We had met for coffee twice in the previous year. We had not discussed Diane either time. We had not needed to. From 30,000 feet somewhere over Tennessee, I opened a text message and typed, "Got something I want to walk you through." Not over the phone. He replied in 11 minutes. "Atlanta or Nashville?" "Nashville. Next week." Done. Back home, I reorganized my life quietly and without ceremony. I moved my work base in the guest room. Early calls, late nights, the soft, persistent sound of a keyboard that Diane had grown so accustomed to over the years that it had become indistinguishable from background noise to her. I told her I needed the space for focused work. She accepted this without blinking, and within 2 days had mentioned twice how lovely it was to finally have the master closet entirely to herself. I noted that, filed it away alongside everything else I had been filing away. That same week, I found someone named Noah Briggs. He was 27 years old, working at a small data analytics firm in Nashville. His professional history showed 18 months at Voss Butte Group before a gap that his LinkedIn timeline quietly acknowledged but did not explain. I had heard his name through a contact in the industry. The understanding I had received was that Diane had terminated him personally, had told HR he lacked the presence and maturity for an executive environment. I met him for lunch at a quiet diner on Charlotte Avenue. He ordered black coffee and a club sandwich and did not bother with small talk, which immediately told me something useful about him. "I know who you are," he said before I'd finished sitting down. I figured this conversation was probably going to happen eventually. What makes you say that? I asked. Noah looked at me with a steadiness that seemed too old for 27. Because I know what Voss looks like from the inside, he said. And I know what someone who is genuinely paying attention looks like from the outside. He picked up his coffee. So what do you need? I told him to finish his sandwich first. Then I told him everything. Two broken people. Two people Diane had discarded without a second thought. And both of them were now sitting at tables with me, becoming the foundation of something she could not have imagined in her worst nightmare. Sometimes the people someone throws away become the very people who change everything. Daniel Voss arrived at our meeting 15 minutes early, which told me precisely where his head was before he had said a single word. He had driven up from Atlanta in a rental, walked into the coffee shop on West End with his jacket folded over one arm and a black coffee already in his hand before I'd settled into my seat. He was 49 now, broader through the shoulders than I remembered, carrying the particular unhurried confidence of a man who had been patient long enough to be proven right about something important. We shook hands. He held mine a beat longer than was strictly necessary. You look like a man with a plan, he said. I look like a man who should have called you 3 years ago, I said. He waved it off and sat down. We're here now. Walk me through it. I did. The full picture. Voss-Butte-S parent structure, the overextended holding capital, Franklin's involvement, the layered shell we were in the process of assembling. Daniel listened the way he always had, without interrupting, one hand wrapped around his coffee cup, eyes completely steady. When I finished, the silence that followed lasted only a moment. What do you need from me? He asked. Capital participation, I said, and access. You have existing relationships with two of the distressed debt funds holding the parent company's paper. I need introductions. Quiet ones. How quiet? Nothing traceable back to bridge flow or to my name. The buyer identity has to stay clean all the way through closing. He nodded slowly, then leaned forward slightly. I want to be clear about one thing first. His voice was measured, careful. This is not about your wife. I held his gaze. I mean that as a business principle, he said. The moment this becomes personal, the structure becomes emotional. Emotional structures develop cracks. Whatever she did, and I can imagine some of it, stays outside this room. Agreed, I said. And I meant it because he was right. That was always the thing about Daniel. He had a way of being right at exactly the moments it mattered most. Meanwhile, Noah Briggs had begun delivering. And the word delivering does not come close to capturing what that young man produced. Within 10 days of our lunch at that diner, he placed in my hands a 42-page structural analysis of Voss-Butte-S parent holding company, subsidiary maps, historical vendor contracts, a detailed breakdown of every licensing agreement in the portfolio ranked by exploitability. He had also flagged something specific, something that made me sit very still when I read it. There was a legacy exclusivity clause in a fragrance distribution agreement with a European partner. It had been drafted 7 years earlier, buried in a routine contract renewal that Diane's legal team had processed without thorough review. The clause prohibited any third-party licensing arrangements in the Asia-Pacific region without written consent from the original contracting party. Nobody at Voss had thought about this clause in years. It was institutional dust. She's going to move on Asian markets, Noah said when he walked me through it. Her third-quarter projections have been circulating internally. She is under real pressure to show international growth numbers before her performance review. And when she does, I said, she will activate this clause without realizing it, he said, especially if the right opportunity is sitting in front of her at exactly the right moment. He looked at me across the table, calm as still water, eating his sandwich as though we were discussing the weather. She fires fast and signs fast. Those are the same instinct. I looked at him for a long moment. She told HR you lack presence, I said. Did that make you angry? Noah thought about it honestly for a second. It made me accurate, he said. Anger spends energy. Accuracy earns results. That was the moment I knew he was the most valuable person I had hired in years. The final piece of the picture was a man named James Way. James went back to the very earliest version of Bridge Flow, before it had a name, when it was only a concept I was pitching to anyone willing to sit still long enough to hear it. He had been running a mid-size electronics distribution operation out of Shenzhen at the time, and he had taken a chance on a 3-month pilot program when every other potential partner had declined. We had stayed close over the years. He called every few months, always brief, always with something worth saying. I call him on a Sunday evening Nashville time. It was Monday morning for him. "You're calling about something real," he said immediately. "Not a question. I need a favor that looks exactly like a business opportunity," I said. "A licensing approach. Fragrance distribution. Asia-Pacific region. Structured to look irresistible to a company that is hungry for regional numbers and moving too fast to read the fine print carefully." A silence. "Who is the company?" he asked. I told him. Another silence, longer this time. "That is your wife's employer," he said. "Yes. And the contract will have structural problems. Carefully constructed ones." 5 full seconds of quiet. Then, "You know what, Marcus? You were there for me when it counted. Send me the framework. I will have reviewed it by Wednesday." That same week, Diane left for a 3-day product summit in Paris. She sent me a photograph from the airport lounge. Champagne, bright smile, a caption that read, "Wish you were here, love." I sent back a single thumb emoji and returned to the acquisition framework documents open on my secure laptop. By Thursday, the parent holding company had received a quiet, non-binding letter of interest from a Zurich-registered advisory entity whose actual ownership chain would have required a forensic accountant 3 full weeks to trace back to anything real. They responded within 48 hours. They were interested. The pieces were all on the board now, and every single one of them had been placed there by quiet, patient, methodical work. The kind of work that does not make noise. The kind Diane had always thought I was incapable of. In part 3, everything starts a move. The trap closes, and Diane, celebrating in her corner of the world, has absolutely no idea. If you're still with me, please share this story, because what is coming will leave you speechless. There is something I want to tell you about building a complex corporate structure quietly. People imagine it is cinematic. Secret meetings in darkened rooms. Briefcases changing hands. Names whispered in parking garages. The reality is almost the opposite of all of that. It is documentation. Precise, sequential, legally immaculate documentation executed by professionals who have done this kind of work 500 times and carry no emotional weight about any of it whatsoever. That absence of emotion is precisely what makes it so effective. Franklin had connected me with a legal firm based in Delaware. 3 founding partners, no public profile, no press mentions in over a decade. A client list that functioned on the principle that discretion was the only luxury that truly held its value. Within 3 weeks of our first meeting, they had established a limited partnership registered in the Cayman Islands, 2 holding entities in Cyprus, and a buyer-facing company that presented to the outside world as a financial advisory group out of Zurich. We called the Hartwell Partners. Nobody at Voss Buick or at the parent holding company had ever heard the name Hartwell Partners. That was precisely the point. While this architecture was being assembled around me, I kept my visible life exactly calibrated. I attended my son Caleb's university alumni event and sat in the bleachers making pleasant conversation with other parents about ordinary things. I attended Diane's firm holiday gathering as her +1 and shook Gerald Whitmore's hand and smiled warmly at Patricia Chun and said all the appropriate things at every appropriate moment. I cooked dinner twice a week. I had her coffee ready every morning before she came downstairs. Diane, for her part, was in a genuinely wonderful mood that season. She had been selected to present at a major European brand summit in Geneva, and the official invitation had arrived on embossed letterhead that she had photographed and posted immediately with a caption about being honored to represent the future of global beauty. 47 people had liked it within the first hour. I was one of them. Caleb called me that same week from his university apartment. He was buried in midterms, he said, but had seen his mother's post. "She seems really excited," he said. "She always is when the calendar is full." I told him. "How's the company?" he asked. He always asked about bridge flow, had since he was 16, and I had walked him through the entire product logic on a whiteboard I had set up in the garage one rainy Saturday. His interest had never been polite. It had always been genuine. "Moving," I said. "The good kind. The best kind." He laughed and told me to call more often. I told him I would and meant every word of it. There is something so quietly painful about being the parent who keeps showing up softly, patiently, building something real, while the other person in your house collects public applause. If you know that feeling, you already understand this story in a way no one else can. James Way's approach had been staged with the kind of precision that Noah's analysis had made possible. A subsidiary of James's distribution company reached out to Voss Butte's Asia-Pacific development team with a licensing proposal framed exactly the way Diane needed to see it: clean commercial summary, strong margin projections, established regional infrastructure, a clearly defined territory that mapped perfectly onto her Q3 expansion goals. Her team completed their review in 72 hours because she had pushed for speed. Speed was always Diane's signature. Her identity was built around moving faster than everyone else in the room. She had not asked anyone to read the contract slowly. I was sitting in the guest room on a Thursday evening when her text arrived. "Just closed a massive Asia deal. Q3 is going to be the best quarter of my career. Don't wait up." I read it twice, set my phone face down on the desk. Then I opened my secure laptop and sent Franklin a single line. "Phase 2 is active." His reply was immediate. "Understood. Notices are prepared. Your call on timing." I closed the laptop, went to the kitchen, poured a glass of cold water, and stood at the window looking out into the backyard. The neighborhood lights were going off one by one. Diane's car was in the driveway, her celebration presumably still ongoing somewhere across the city. The yard was very quiet, the kind of quiet that gathers when something significant has just shifted without making any sound. I thought about the birthday party, the champagne glass, the wink, Gerald Whitmore's comfortable, thoughtless laugh. I rinsed my glass, dried my hands, and went to bed. The notices could wait until morning. Diane came home from Geneva on a Thursday evening, carrying that particular radiance that international travel gives to people who have decided they deserve it. She dropped her bag in the entryway, touched her cheek to mine, and spent 45 minutes on the phone with her assistant before she sat down for the dinner I had prepared. I made pasta. She ate half of it and talked about Geneva for the entire meal, the presenters, the venue, the private dinner, who had been impressive and who had disappointed. She mentioned Gerald twice and Patricia 3 times. She did not ask about my week. I refilled her water glass and listened and said the right things at the right intervals. What I did not mention was that earlier that same day Franklin had confirmed Hartwell Partners was now in formal negotiation with the parent holding company. The structure was intact. The buyer identity was clean. And Noah had just delivered his second analysis, this one focused on the internal approval velocity within Diane's division. Fast, always fast. Sign first, review later. Speed as identity, as brand, as competitive weapon. She doesn't read contracts, Noah had told me at our last meeting. She reads the summary her assistant prepares. Price, timeline, territory, and if those 3 lines look favorable, she approves within 20 minutes. Legal review is a formality she schedules after the decision is already made. She had triggered 3 separate breach conditions with a single signature. The licensing error was not carelessness in the ordinary sense. It was velocity. Diane moved fast because moving fast had always worked for her before. Her instincts had always been sharper than the fine print, until they weren't. That same week, Diane filed for divorce. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because when I tell people she was the one who pulled the trigger, they're always surprised. But if you had been living inside our marriage the way I had, it would not surprise you at all. She came home on a Tuesday evening and announced, with the composure of someone who had rehearsed the words in a hotel mirror in Geneva, that she felt we had grown in separate directions, that what had been obvious privately should now be formalized, and that she had already retained legal representation. She handed me a business card. She was prepared for tears or anger, or at minimum a long, painful conversation she had also prepared to win. Instead, I looked at the card, set it on the counter, and asked if she wanted dinner. The expression on her face in that moment, that brief flicker of something she could not name, that is something I will carry with me for a very long time. What Diane did not know was that she had filed for divorce in the middle of a corporate acquisition in which her career, her professional identity, her entire sense of self was about to be fundamentally restructured. Her attorney was preparing a standard high-income dissolution case. My attorney, a woman named Sylvia Reed, was preparing something else entirely. I had found Sylvia 8 months earlier through a corporate law referral, back when I was simply restructuring Bridge Flow's equity agreements, and none of this had fully taken shape yet. She was 41, precise in a way that communicated itself before she spoke a single word. She built legal arguments the way structural engineers build load-bearing walls. Every element in its correct position, nothing present that was not necessary, nothing missing that was required. When I had brought her into the fuller picture 2 months prior, she had listened without any visible surprise and said, "You have been thorough." "I had time," I said. "The financial misconduct documentation alone is grounds for significant adjustment," she told me. "Combined with everything else you've built, this will be very difficult to contest." I had discovered the personal brokerage account 3 months earlier. $41,000, redirected from our joint investment accounts over 4 years in increments carefully kept below the threshold that would trigger automatic review. Our financial auditor had found the trail. Sylvia had been copied on every document since. And so the timing, as Franklin always said, was everything. In Part 4, the cascade begins. Diane starts to feel something closing around her and does not understand what it is. And then comes the morning she walks into a boardroom and sees my face. I promise you, that scene will stay with you. The first sign came on a Monday morning. Diane walked into the kitchen with her phone in one hand and the expression of someone who has just read something that does not make sense within the rules of the world they thought they understood. She poured her coffee, read the screen again, set the phone down on the counter with slightly more force than she intended. "Everything all right?" I asked from behind my laptop. "Internal matter," she said. "Nothing major." She left for the office. I waited until I heard her car reach the end of the street, then opened my secure laptop and pulled up the notification dashboard Franklin's team had assembled. 3 breach notifications had been formally triggered through Voss Butte's corporate structure. 2 had been acknowledged by the company's general counsel. The third was pending a board-level response request from the European licensing partner. The cascade was moving exactly the way Noah had mapped it on a diner table 2 months earlier over black coffee and a club sandwich. By Wednesday, she came home distracted in a way she could not conceal. She ate dinner without a single comment about the food. She checked her phone 4 times at the table. She took a call out to the back porch, and through the glass door, I could hear fragments, her voice climbing and then dropping and then settling into that flat, controlled register she used when she was furious and choosing not to show it. She came back inside and said her leadership team was managing something complicated. "Anything you can help resolve?" I asked. "Not tonight," she said. "The way people say things when they mean not ever." Thursday brought a board-level memo, a formal communication citing material compliance concerns and announcing a temporary freeze on all new vendor contracts pending legal review. Diane called me from the office at noon, her voice tight and careful. "Someone is moving against us," she said. "I can feel it. The timing is too exact. The pressure points are too targeted. Someone inside has given away our structure. Could be a competitor," I offered. "Competitors don't know which clauses to activate," she said, her voice sharp now. "This is surgical. This is someone who understood our architecture from the inside." I made the appropriate sound of concern and told her I hoped she figured it out. That evening she sat across the dinner table from me and said something that cracked something small and quiet inside my chest. "For the first time in this marriage," she said, her voice dropping to something almost fragile, "I am genuinely frightened, Marcus. I do not know who is doing this or why." I looked at her across the table. 19 years. The birthday party. The champagne. The wink. Gerald Whitmore's easy laugh rolling across that room. "You'll work it out," I said, as gently as I knew how. "You always do." She nodded, went back to her phone, reassured. What she did not know was that a man named Harold Downs had called me 2 days earlier. Harold was Diane's most trusted professional mentor, the person who had championed her career trajectory for over a decade. He had reached out through an intermediary with a single clean message. I am aware of what is unfolding. I will not be standing in its way. Harold had known my father's closest business partner. He had followed my career from a respectful distance for years. He had understood, from the evening Diane had introduced us at a company function 6 years earlier, that something complicated and significant was being built on both sides of that marriage. He had remained neutral for as long as neutrality was possible. When the ground shifted, he chose where to stand. Diane's career had given her a mentor. My patients had given me one too. The week closed with Voss Butte's CFO requesting an emergency financial review. Diane described it over Friday dinner as an overreaction to routine compliance noise. She said it with absolute conviction, the way she said most things. I nodded and passed the breadbasket. Behind the guest room door that night, Franklin's message was already waiting. Parent company has accepted preliminary terms. Closing window is 6 weeks. I turned off the lamp and slept more deeply than I had in months. She was sitting at the same table, eating the same dinner, living in the same house, completely unaware that the ground she was standing on had already shifted beneath her feet. Sometimes the most significant things happen in absolute silence. Diane hired a private investigator in late October. Sylvia flagged it through monitoring of certain legal filings, an inquiry submitted to a licensed investigation firm in Nashville on Diane's behalf. The scope of the investigation was focused on my business activities, specifically whether Bridgeflow had undisclosed financial interests that might affect the divorce asset valuation. The investigator was a retired detective named Carl Briggs, no relation to Noah. He spent 8 days on the assignment. He reviewed Bridgeflow's public filings, attended 2 events where I was scheduled to speak, photographed my office building from a parking garage across the street, and on one afternoon followed me to a lunch meeting with Daniel in Brentwood. Daniel spotted the surveillance immediately, said absolutely nothing, finished his meal, and texted me from the parking lot. You've picked up a shadow. Gray sedan, 3rd row. He is not particularly skilled at this. I thanked him and forwarded the information to Franklin. Franklin's response was the quiet, controlled laugh of a man who finds other people's incomplete strategies genuinely amusing. She has hired someone to find a thing that does not have her husband's name on it, he said, and it will not have her husband's name on it. Carl Briggs delivered his report to Diane's attorney 11 days later. His conclusion: Marcus Halford operated a legitimate and financially healthy software company with strong recurring revenue, no identified offshore interests, and no undisclosed assets. Standard profile of a successful founder. Nothing actionable. Diane called me after she read it. I could hear the specific texture of frustration in her voice, the sound of someone recalibrating after expecting a completely different answer. Your company is doing well, she said. It was not a compliment. I've been saying so for a while. I told her. What Sylvia shared with me that same week was the detail about our prenuptial agreement. The document Diane had signed before our wedding with a wave of her hand and a comment about lawyers overcomplicating everything contained a financial misconduct clause. Undisclosed personal accounts funded through the redirection of joint marital assets qualified clearly and completely under its language. Sylvia had 4 years of documented transfers and 5 months of account statements. Diane's attorney had found the prenup. Diane's attorney had gone quiet. The week before the Hartwell closing, I drove back to Vermont to sit with Franklin one last time on that porch. The October cold had deepened. The trees had lost most of their color. We went through the final sequence together, the closing mechanics, the integration structure, the board notifications, the precise morning on which Diane would walk in her office building for the last time, not knowing that the company she had built her entire identity around now had a new principle. Have you thought about what you will say to her when she understands? Franklin asked. I'm not going to say much, I told him. That has been the whole point from the beginning. He nodded slowly, then said the only personal thing he said that entire afternoon. Your father would have respected this. I drove back to the airport without turning on the radio. The morning of the boardroom meeting, I was already seated at the far end of a long, dark oak table on the 41st floor of Boardroom.The Nashville headquarters when I heard the elevator open in the corridor outside. The room was floor-to-ceiling glass. The Nashville skyline stretched out behind me in the early morning light. I heard her voice first, speaking briefly to someone in the hallway, that familiar professional brightness she always carried into rooms she believed she owned. Then she walked in. I watched her scan the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who enters spaces and immediately reads them. The unfamiliar faces, the absence of her CFO from the head position, the two HR representatives stationed near the far wall, the legal team from Hartwell Partners, the two board members she recognized who were both studying their documents with unusual care, Harold Downs, her mentor of a decade, examining his legal pad as though it contained something of extraordinary interest. And then her eyes found me. I watched the sequence move through her face like weather moving across open water. Confusion first. Why is Marcus here? Then the beginning of a rational explanation assembling itself, something that still made the world coherent. Then the explanation failing. Then the failure of the next explanation. Then, finally, understanding arriving like cold air through an open door, and with it, something that was not quite fear, but was not far from it either. I did not stand. I did not smile. I opened the folder in front of me and said to the room, "Let's begin. We have a significant amount of ground to cover this morning." Her voice came out controlled, which told me she was working considerably harder than she appeared to be. "Marcus, what is this?" "A transition meeting," I said. "Effective this morning, Hartwell Partners hold a controlling interest in Boardroom.The Group through its acquisition of the parent holding company. I am the principal of Hartwell." The CFO, 2 seats from Diane, closed his eyes briefly, the way people close their eyes when something they had feared has now become real. "That is not," Diane began. "Stopped. You cannot just," stopped again. I held her gaze steadily. "The documentation is in front of you. The legal team will walk through the transition structure in detail. Your role remains intact through the end of this quarter with a performance review at the beginning of the next cycle." A silence stretched through the room. "You built this to hurt me," she said. Her voice had dropped to a register the room pretended not to hear. "I built this because I know how to build things, Diane." My voice was quiet and even. "That is what I have been doing the entire time you were standing at your birthday party telling people I would never amount to anything worth mentioning." The room was silent in the way rooms are silent when everyone present has simultaneously stopped breathing. Diane sat down, not because she chose to, because her body made the decision on her behalf. Harold Downs kept his eyes on his legal pad. I turned to the Hartwell legal team. "Let's begin with the integration timeline." And we did. Part 5 is the last chapter. The settlement. The letter on her desk. The sticky note with 4 words that said everything. And what happened to me, finally, when the dust settled and the silence returned. This one's going to hit differently. Stay with me. There was an envelope waiting on Diane's desk when she returned from the boardroom. Cream-colored, heavy stock. Her first name written in clean, precise block lettering. No title, no professional designation. Just her name, the way you write the name of a person when you want them to understand that every wall they built around themselves has come down at once. The embossed logo in the upper left corner of the envelope read Hartwell Partners. She told me later, through her attorney, that she had stood in the doorway of her own office for nearly a full minute before she could bring herself to cross the threshold and pick it up. I was not there to see that. I heard about it the way you hear about things that happen on the other side of a wall you built yourself. The words came to me secondhand, filtered through legal language and professional summary, but I felt the weight of them anyway. Inside the envelope, a formal reassignment letter, an NDA addendum standard to any ownership transition, and a small yellow sticky note in my handwriting. For words, not so little anymore. The reassignment moved her from Senior Vice President of Global Product Development to Strategic Advisor for North American markets. Same salary through the end of the quarter. Reporting line to the incoming Chief Technology Officer, a role I would occupy through the transition period. Her assistant would remain. Her office would remain. Most of the visible architecture of her professional life would remain. Everything underneath, it had simply changed hands. Her attorney called Sylvia within 2 hours of the envelope being opened. The conversation, by Sylvia's account, was very loud on one side and very quiet on the other. The divorce proceedings restructured themselves that same week. Beverly's legal team had finally conducted a thorough reading of the prenuptial agreement, and what they had discovered in Section 14 had apparently required an extended internal conversation before anyone was prepared to present it to Diane directly. The financial misconduct clause was unambiguous. 4 years of documented asset redirections into an undisclosed personal account qualified clearly under its language. Sylvia told me Diane's attorney had requested a settlement conference instead of continuing into full discovery. "That is what people do," Sylvia said, with her characteristic absence of ceremony, "when the arithmetic stops working in their favor." We met on a Wednesday afternoon in a conference room downtown. Diane, her attorney, myself, Sylvia, the kind of room designed to make everyone feel equally uncomfortable, which is the point. Diane was composed, the specific, precise composure of someone who has accepted an outcome they have not yet finished being angry about. She sat straight, hands folded, eyes on the table for most of the time. At one point, her attorney raised the question of whether the Hartwell acquisition constituted a marital asset subject to division. Sylvia let the question finish completely. Then she opened her binder and explained, with the unhurried clarity of someone who has built a load-bearing structure and is entirely confident in its integrity, that Bridgeflow's original capitalization predated any of the redirected joint funds by 4 years. The Hartwell vehicle had been funded entirely through Bridgeflow's operating revenue, held in a personal investment account that had been separately maintained and fully disclosed in the original prenuptial financial schedule. There was nothing to divide. Diane looked up from the table for the first time all afternoon. Her eyes found mine. I held her gaze and said nothing. Her attorney requested a brief recess. We reached a settlement 3 weeks later. She kept the house. She had wanted it, and I had no interest in fighting over a building. She received a fair support arrangement for 3 years. The personal brokerage account she had quietly assembled over 4 years was folded back into the settlement calculation as a marital asset under the misconduct clause, which neutralized her leverage so completely that the negotiation essentially concluded itself. She remained in her advisory role at Voss through the end of the quarter as promised. She was professional. Her team respected her. The operational transition was genuinely smooth, and I respected that about her, even then, even after everything. There had always been something in her that was genuinely good at what she did. That part had always been real. I moved into a clean, spare 2-bedroom apartment near the Gulch and furnished it with exactly what I needed and nothing that I didn't. It was the first space I had occupied in years that felt entirely, honestly mine. Now, before I tell you how this story ends, I need to stop and ask you something directly, because this story is not just mine. Have you ever been the quiet one in the room? The one who kept showing up, kept building, kept believing in something, while someone nearby collected the applause and forgot to see you? Have you ever swallowed something painful in public and smiled and said nothing, not because you were weak, but because you understood that patience is not the same thing as defeat? Tell me in the comments. If you have dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Caleb came home for the holidays that November. He sat across from me at the small kitchen table in my new apartment, the city lights visible through the window behind him, and we ate takeout from a place he had loved since he was 14 and talked for 3 uninterrupted hours about Bridgeflow, about his coursework, about what came after graduation, about the years we had just moved through together and separately. It was the kind of conversation that makes up for a lot of lost time when it finally happens. At one point, he looked at me and said, "I used to think you were just letting her win." "I know," I said. "I get it now, Dad." I poured us both more coffee. There was nothing that needed to be added to that. The week after Thanksgiving, Sylvia called to confirm that all settlement documents had been fully executed. Clean, complete, final. She said it the way she said everything, without ceremony, because the work had always been sufficient to speak for itself. That same afternoon, Daniel sent me a text. "Drinks when you're ready. You owe me something exceptional." I replied, "Name the place." I sat at my desk in the Bridgeflow office afterward and looked out at the Nashville skyline going gold in the late afternoon light. The company's annual recurring revenue had crossed a milestone I had stopped predicting aloud 2 years ago. 3 new enterprise contracts were in final legal review. The Hartwell portfolio was generating precisely the returns the model had projected. I thought about Diane at that birthday party. The champagne glass tilted in her hand. The easy, comfortable wink. "Won't be paying our bills, but we let him dream." I never needed her permission to dream. I only needed time and silence and the willingness to keep building when nobody was watching. I thought about Franklin on his porch in Vermont, legal pad balanced on his knee, the October cold settling around us, saying your father would have respected this in the quiet, private way of someone offering a gift they have carried for a long time. I thought about Daniel in a parking lot in Brentwood, spotting a gray sedan and texting me without changing his expression once. I thought about Noah Briggs eating a club sandwich at a diner on Charlotte Avenue, 27 years old, saying anger spends energy and accuracy earns results with the steadiness of someone 3 times his age. I thought about James Way picking up a Monday morning call and saying you were there for me when it counted without any hesitation at all. And then I let all of it go, because that chapter was finished. The settlement was signed. The apartment was mine. The company was running. And my son had looked at me across a kitchen table and said, "I get it now," with a fullness in his voice that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Some people build things to make a point. I built this one because I knew how to build it, because the work itself had always been reason enough. The point had simply taken care of itself along the way. The press announcement happened on a Thursday morning in December in the atrium of Voss Budess headquarters. About 60 people gathered, board members, department heads, trade press, a handful of investors quietly connected to the transition. Sylvia was there, standing near the back wall in a charcoal blazer with a coffee in her hand, watching everything with the calm attention of someone who understood every single thing that had led to this room. We had crossed a line in the months since all of this concluded. Dinner twice. A long conversation at a rooftop bar one late September evening, where she talked about her own divorce 4 years earlier, and I listened the way she had always listened to me, with full attention and no agenda. Something real and unhurried had taken root between us, and I had decided to let it grow at whatever pace it chose. Diane was present, too. She stood with her team near the left side of the room, composed and professional, exactly as she had always been in rooms that required it. We had been civil throughout the transition, more than civil. There was no theater in it. She was skilled at her work. She kept doing it. I respected that simply and without complication. When the board chair introduced me as principal of Hartwell Partners and incoming executive chair, I stepped to the podium and said what needed saying. Brief, clean, focused on the company and the people who had built it. I did not look at Diane during any of it. Afterward, in the corridor outside, a reporter from a business publication asked me the standard questions. Strategy, vision, what had drawn me to this particular acquisition? I gave the standard answers, because the real answer was not hers to receive. A board member I will not name leaned toward me as the reporter moved away and said, quietly, with a slight smile at the corner of his mouth, "Was any of this personal?" I buttoned my jacket. I thought about it honestly for a moment, the way the question deserved. "It started personal," I said. "It became business. That is usually how the best ones go." He laughed and moved on. Ryan called that evening from his university apartment, having seen the coverage in the trade feeds. "Dad," he said, and there was something in how he said just that one word that I will never forget. "It's everywhere." "I know," I said. "How do you feel?" I was standing at the window of my apartment, looking out at the Nashville city, lights the way I had looked at them from a car window on the night of that birthday party, when everything had been wrong and I had understood with quiet certainty what needed to be done. "I feel like myself," I said, probably for the first time in a very long time. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good. That is exactly what I wanted to hear." We talked for another 40 minutes. Normal things. Good things. The kind of conversation that only becomes possible when the weight that has been pressing on something for years is finally, permanently lifted. After we hung up, I poured a small glass of bourbon, sat in the chair by the window, let the quiet come in and settle around me like something earned. I thought about all of it one last time, and then I let it go. The company was running. The settlement was signed. The apartment was mine. My son was proud of me in a way that did not require words, because I could hear it in every single call. I finished the bourbon, rinsed the glass, went to bed. Tomorrow there was work to do, and I was, without any question, exactly the right person to do it.